Welcome, everybody. This is a confidential webinar for pastors and church leaders who are curious about LGBTQ questions. We have a great panel that will introduce themselves here in a second. Throughout the whole conversation, if you have any questions that are in the moment, you can put them in the chat. We'll keep you guys muted for now. Towards the end, we'll allow you to unmute and ask direct questions if you'd like. You're also welcome to just stick to the chat. And we do have a bunch of your questions that are going to guide the conversation from those who wrote some questions in the registration form for today. And so feel free to push back if we're answering all your questions and you have follow-up questions, or we haven't answered your question directly. You're welcome to be a part of that conversation too. So thank you guys all for joining us. Mara, would you like to introduce yourself first? Give us a little bit about where you are and your ministry, your relationship with ministry.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be with you today. I am the pastor of Community Church in Ada, which is on the west side of Michigan. We are a smallish but growing congregation within the Reformed Church in America, um, which tends to be, I don't know, what would you say? Center, center right, center left. It's the RCA is many things. I have been here for 14 years. Um, our process of becoming open and affirming to LGBT people started really the very first conversation that we had with the search team when they were calling us. They knew that they wanted to have conversations about LGBT inclusion. And so actually the very first question they asked is, how would you do that if you became our pastor? Um, and we spent the next, boy, I, we spent the next 8, 10 years working on that conversation. Um, and we became officially open and affirming in February of 2020, 3 weeks before COVID shut down. And that was not an easy decision. We had decided that we were going to require 2/3 vote of our leadership board, and we made exactly to that threshold. So it was not, it was a difficult, contested decision. And then we didn't have an opportunity to figure out how to live together after that. And so then everything just kind of fell apart. And and the last and now everything is being put back together in a really beautiful, wonderful way. Um, we have a bunch of LGBT people in our congregation, and it's really become a natural part of our life together and how we seek to follow Christ together. So it's been the journey has been many things, and I'm happy to be here to talk with you about it.
Great. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing.
Yeah.
Daniel, how about you give us a little background?
Sure. I my in my first life, I was a New Testament professor. I worked for Fuller Seminary for about 8 years, and um, my in some of my writing, I had left doors open for maybe sort of traditional evangelicals. Maybe we were wrong. So when it came time for me to, it was close to time for me to apply for tenure. I asked for a meeting with one of my senior colleagues, just to see if she would support me in my tenure application. And she brought another senior colleague along, and basically ended up having a very long discussion about how, for them, LGBT exclusion was sort of inherent to the school's evangelical identity, and that even the possibility that we could be wrong, given that the Bible says that men having sex with each other is not okay. Um, it kind of put me outside the pale of what was acceptable at Fuller. And so I did apply for tenure. I was not given tenure, and the that was one of the reasons that was cited in that conversation. I ended up going from there. I worked with what used to be called the New Begin House. It had a pretty close association with City Church in San Francisco, which was RCA also at the time. Um, and I led a 12-month fellowship program, or as a 9-month fellowship program for working professionals. We'd run it over the school year every year. And as City Church itself had become affirming, and that was really our primary well that we were drawing the New Begin Fellows from. By about like the second year I was there, I made a really big push to recruit in the LGBT small group and what have you. And by the third year that I was there, fully 3/4 or more of the New Begin Fellows were actually members of the LGBT community who were there. So it was in some ways like a really beautiful thing to see how, like, once that space was created, that, that desire to continue to be able to connect in, what was basically an evangelical world and an ethos from these LGBTQ sisters and brothers was really, really strong. So that was really kind of a good redemptive moment for me in that arc. I'm no longer in ministry. I work as a medical professional now. I'm a PA. I have started doing some writing recently on LGBT inclusion, um, with a book hopefully in the works for the next year and a half or two.
And Daniel, didn't you just finish a book on like a commentary on the book of Romans?
I do have a book, a commentary on Romans that came out a little while ago. I wrote it. It probably came out like 2 years ago. It's if any of you know the Pete Enns Bible for Normal People Empire, this was Romans for normal people in there, with some of the best jokes that I've ever put in writing. So I commend it to you.
We'll have to link to it in the email that we send out tomorrow to everybody.
But you committed to us for the jokes. Am I clear about that?
Yeah,
Not for the amazing scholarship that is no doubt in there.
come on. Every Romans is so well worn. You need something to keep you engaged. Yeah.
Noted.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you, Daniel. We appreciate your time and for sharing with us today. Bill, do you want to do a little intro as
Sure.
well?
I am Bill White, and I co-pastor a quirky, diverse church in Long Beach, California. And I am also the executive director of Small Church Big Table. We went through a process, 10 years ago, talking about LGBT inclusion. And it was super significant for our church. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But along the way, what happened was a lot of other churches said, how do you have these conversations? What's helpful, what's not? And so my co-pastor and I started a little nonprofit, Small Church Big Table, to have these conversations, particularly with evangelicals, people who love Jesus, love Scripture, and who want to honor their church and not sort of blow it up, but to be thoughtful and kind and recognize that there is theological diversity in our midst, and what do we do with that? So, yeah, so that's where I'm at.
Awesome.
That's all I do. Yeah.
That's all.
Mhm.
Great. Mara, you mentioned that your process was an 8 to 10 year ongoing conversation. Do you want to give us a little overview of like what elements were included in that? And then maybe speak to a little bit about the congregation digesting what the leadership was relaying to them.
Yeah. So that was the first question in the that the search committee asked us. Uh,
Yeah.
and then when I say we, my husband and I started out co-pastoring here at the church. Now he works for our denomination and I'm solo pastoring at the church. So when I say we, that's what I am referring to. Um, of course, then, as with all search committee processes, when a pastor starts at a church, you find out kind of what the realities are on the ground and what the search committee had been hoping for. We realized there was a lot of groundwork that needed to be laid before we took on that conversation. Um, and so the first few years, we talked about talking about it. That this was something that that we're going to tackle. We're not sure how. And just kind of listening and building relational equity as new pastors. There wasn't a presenting reason for starting the conversation about around inclusion, other than the desire to move in that direction for theological and social
And
reasons.
were you having these conversations just with like church leadership people, not the congregation for the first 2 years?
Some of both. So with
Okay.
the church, the leadership, and with congregants. So I also started a doctoral program at that same time in conflict transformation with a focus on leading a congregation through same-sex marriage conversations. Um, so they knew that I was doing that, and that kind of was an excuse for me to do some of my work with congregation members. So I was
Mm,
doing interviews, and so it was sort of under the guise of we're helping Mara do this
yeah.
project, but also leading them in a certain direction. Once we were finally ready to start having the conversation, um, we did a lot of in helping people talk about their perspectives.
Mm,
Um, and Billy and I, my husband and I, knew that if we were going to ask people to take the risk of sharing where they were at with this, that we would have to go first. And that felt tricky but necessary to share with the congregation that we were open and affirming to LGBT people and why.
mhm.
Um, and then we facilitated a bunch of conversations, helping people speak and listen to each other. And then after that, we kind of left it for a while because there wasn't clarity on how to move forward. We felt like we had done a hard thing with encouraging that kind of vulnerability, and it didn't blow the church up. And in fact, it helped bring us together more and have more clarity on how we wanted to live together. So we just kind of sat with that for a few years, and then eventually, it felt like it was an integrity issue for me as leader that I couldn't continue to live in this middle space of not being able to perform same-sex weddings and things like that. And so I kind of pushed it and said, we need to make some decisions about this. Where are we going to be? So then we started more conversations in earnest with our leadership board. Um, and that process, the last part of the process took about 8 months. And then I told you what happened from there. So,
That's great. Thank you for sharing.
yeah.
Um, for any of you guys on the panel, we have a couple questions about like kind of like what Mara just shared about having these conversations where there's going to be a differing of views. Um, so somebody asked, how do you respond when theological convictions diverge, but relationship and community remain possible. And or or there's a couple other questions that are like similar to that.
Mhm.
I mean, Daniel, I think your setting is just so instructive to be part of a large organization and to have your views be the minority view. Um, how would you answer that?
Oh, wow. Um, it's well, I think that there's there's different difficulties depending on whether you're in the position of power or not.
Mhm.
And, as a junior faculty person, I didn't have protection or power. So probably would have been a lot smarter for me not to say anything at all. Um, I mean, smarter in terms of job preservation,
Yeah.
what have you. But you know, uh, Um, honestly, and I should say, like, honestly, I never regret, um, I never regretted like erring on the side of telling people that, you know, God actually loves them more than maybe some theological position would have left them thinking.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think, one of the things that I realized, and I think that posture is actually part of how I handled, like, I had some gay students at different points who came out to me, and like in that context, just to be able to say, hey, we disagree, but I'm delighted that you're here and that we're learning together. Um, and I I think that the value, like when I think about the value that can possibly come like from some of those places of like living together in the disagreement, um, I think one of the most valuable things that can happen there is to get beneath the theological disagreement and start to suss out, why does it feel so catastrophic for me to be sharing space with somebody who disagrees with me theologically here?
Mm.
Um, and that's where, like, in reflecting on myself, from in my own journey to becoming affirming, I realized that, like, I was in the literal definition of homophobic. I was literally afraid that being affirming meant that you were giving up the authority of scripture, that you were giving up on basically the trustworthiness of God, our ability to hear and to know, what God would want from us. Like, it
Mm.
it was representative of, like, falling off the wagon of faithful Christianity,
Yeah.
because of the ways that the rhetoric functioned in the worlds where I was living, and
Hmm.
also because how strange affirming people in churches felt to me. Like, they were in institutions I didn't trust, with a theological method that I didn't trust. All and like this conclusion was really the a shibboleth for me that told me they were this scary other, that's not faithful to God. Um,
Mm.
so, like, I think that being able to start like hammering out, like, why really, like, do I have this visceral reaction, and like having the lengthy conversations to get behind, like, okay, you say it's because of this, but here's some other ways where we don't actually do what scripture says, like, as a church that we've kind of socialized and we're all okay with, like, what's the difference here? And I think some, like, the value of being together is both that you can uncover that stuff, and then hopefully you can also be in community with people who you love and know and trust, even if you may not, maybe your trust is a little shaken because of this conversation, but really being able to witness that somebody is faithfully following Jesus, if even if, like, if you bracket this issue, um, in other ways, I think that that actually helps with with the whole process, and kind of the mutual love and respect.
Yeah, I love that. We've definitely seen that in our coaching small church big table when we start having actual conversations and people realize, oh, there is like a diversity of belief already in our congregation. But, just day to day or week to week, you don't think about it because you just assume, oh, we all go to the same church, we all believe the same things. And we don't
Mhm.
talk about the little tiny things here and there that are not salvation issues, right? But Daniel also mentioned this a minute ago. What advice would you give to a church leader who's talking to other church leaders who might have the opinion of like, this is a slippery slope of letting anything slide and in when you're trying to get to like an affirming view of scripture.
Yeah, it depends who I'm talking to,
Yeah.
honestly, how I answer that question. Um, so I'm going to trust that, for the dozen of us on this call, we're honestly curious people, um, and not combative, right? So, because again, it depends. Um, but for curious folks, you say, but isn't it a slippery slope? I and this and Mara and Daniel may disagree with this, which is would be unusual. I say you're right. It is.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the things I'll say is one of the reasons we need. I mean, I think we have need in the church for the progressives, and I think we have need in the church for the conservatives. The conservatives conserve things, which is so lovely. Because one of the things that I think is a legitimate fear for our conservative siblings in Christ is they've seen that when we step onto this slope talking about LGBT inclusion, that it slides us all the way down, and people just slide all the way into sort of this black hole of and I have lots of friends who would say they don't identify as a Christian anymore. These are pastor friends of mine, multiple pastor friends, seminary trained, who this was their slippery slope into quote unquote unbelief or whatever. At the same time, we desperately need our progressive siblings to help us say, gosh, shouldn't we love better? And if there's some slip there, isn't that a gift? Because you're slipping away from a rigid, condemning, judgmental view. And and the question is, how do we dance well on the slope where we are?
Yeah.
So Daniel, Mara, feel free to disagree with me about the slippery slope.
I felt super anxious as you were saying that.
Yeah, right.
I'm
Valid.
just, I'm not, I appreciate your perspective, though. I'm not willing to concede the slippery
Yeah.
slope, but maybe I need to think about that a little more
Oh,
carefully.
no, no, no. Tell us more.
I think people, oh gosh, I think what people want to know is um, what many people want to know is, can I love Jesus and honor the Bible and love and affirm my LGBT kid or my LGBT friend? And in my experience, in West Michigan, maybe it's different other places. People legitimately did not know how they could do that, but they wanted to. There's just no examples of it. Um, and so the slippery slope represents this like fear that you did a really good job of acknowledging, Bill, that it is a legitimate fear of having to give up everything. Um, but I think there are some people who are truly asking for like, show me how you do this. Like, tell me, how do you read these texts? And show me how you can be open and affirming and be serious about the Bible at the same time. Um,
Well, Mara,
and for,
so the Pharisees, right? They said, "We will not go down that slippery slope. We will put up so many, like think about the Sabbath. We will put up
yeah,
so many barriers that we will never slip." And Jesus says, "You're screwed."
yeah.
So I agree with you, right?
Yeah. And I also say like, ooh, slippery slope. That sounds like fun. Like, let's go for a ride. It's another response that I've had at times. Like, what are you so afraid of? Like, God is bigger than this question. It really depends on kind of who I'm talking to. But the other, I mean, sometimes this stuff, when people come at it as in argumentative ways, and really in their defensive corners. Then there's a real discipline to saying when people start talking about the slippery slope or we're opening a door to sin or all of this, it's been really helpful for me just to say I see it differently and take the opportunity to define myself in that way. I see it differently, but tell me what matters to you. Like define yourself and stay connected is a two phrases that I hold to when I don't know what else to do. Define yourself and stay connected.
You know, an, I think maybe another way of like bringing together the things that both of you guys have said is um, slippery slope to where I don't know, but it may very well be that in 5 years you find yourself preaching a gospel that the you of today would not recognize. Um, like,
That's huge.
That's so true. We on our previous webinar, we had, we asked a question like who's had any change in their theology in the last, 5 years, and it was unanimous. Um, Speaking of those people who are going down the slippery slope and are maybe like close to the door of leaving church, um, how do you uh, minister or show love to those people who are, you know, either the non-affirming who are afraid that you're just affirming, all kinds of sin, or, the LGBTQ people who um, are thinking about stepping out of the church because they're just not feeling like the love they're feeling is the love that they see in the Bible.
I think there's a
We can,
lot of listening to be done.
mm,
I think for LGBT people uh, or allies who are on their way out because they're disillusioned or, yeah, not seeing, I mean, you know all the reasons. They've they've experienced, a lot of them have experienced a long haul trauma. Um, and if, you know, if I have listening is super important. I've often gotten in our church just because of the nature of Christianity around us. I've gotten people who come to our church as sort of a last ditch effort, like they've left another church. They found us as an open and affirming church, and they're like, I'm going to try this out for a while and see if this Christianity thing can be for me. Um, and many of them have not stayed. Um, and that's okay. For me, my role in that is to just listen. And there are lots of different kinds of leaving a community. There's angry leaving, there's turn your back leaving, cut off. And then there's the leaving of like this honest, and leaving that has comes with integrity. And on both sides, I've worked really hard in to help people leave with integrity um, and some kind of closure and health. Not everybody wants to do that, though. So you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
thank you. Yeah, that's a great response. Um, what, I'm sorry, what advice would you give somebody who is a leader in church, a church leader who wants to have these conversations? The question that was asked in the registration was, how do I bring up this conversation with my congregation? Maybe we like take it a step back and talk about bringing it up amongst like leadership first.
Yeah, I mean, I think about how do you initiate this question? It depends, like Daniel said earlier, it depends on your position.
Yeah.
Being junior faculty at a large evangelical seminary, that's a different position than if you're the lead pastor or if you're the lead elder. If if you're a dad who serves once a month in the nursery, that's a different position too. So, um, I encourage people always to look for a safe person in leadership that they can have a one-on-one with to say, hey, I'm starting to explore this. Just wanted to let you know. Um, and we actually have a blog on the on our small church big table website about how do you initiate this conversation with your pastor. If you're the pastor, yeah, that's a different experience also, um, because you can lose your job, right? Or if you're a junior faculty member,
Mhm.
you can you can lose your job, right? And so one of the first things I always encourage people to do when I'm talking to a pastor is I ask them to do a full financial assessment. Just hey, look at your finances. How much savings do you have? Do you have a spouse? Are they working? Where do you get your health benefits? These sorts of things, just so that they can be financially prepared for the possible implications of this sort of conversation. And then you know, then I work through a kind of a system of questions, kind of almost like a checklist.
Mhm.
Start there. Yeah.
Yeah. What about along those lines? And then we'll get to the congregation. But um, what advice do you have? There's a question about like having denominational restrictions that are on top of what the leadership, you know, has their own convictions. Um, can you guys speak to some of the churches that you coached or interacted with who might have been in that situation?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's tricky. That was our situation when we first started having these conversations. It was certainly not clear that it was allowed
Yeah.
in the way that the Reformed Church in America lives together. We were at throughout the years, we became increasingly clear that this is what God was calling us to do, even if it jeopardized our denominational relationship. Um, and then eventually the way kind of opened a little bit in the RCA so that it's not as much of a position of risk anymore. Um, Yeah, that's not an option for everyone. I just I think clear is kind. And if you know that there are going to be certain constraints that you're living under as you have these conversations, like be super honest about that. Um, if there are things that you can't do and that you know that you're willing to uh, take a risk on, the risk isn't something that's within the realm of workability. Clear is kind.
Yeah.
I
Thank you.
just a couple of church scenarios. So worked with one church that is in a denomination that has been firing people recently for holding views that are affirming. And this church, their staff team went through a process and they said, okay, we're going to be maximally affirming within the limitations of our non-affirming denomination because they wanted to stay and they wanted to work from within the system. Other folks leave the system. So we're coaching a church right now in an urban center that is part of a denomination that is non-affirming, and they've been on this process for about a year, and in in their process, so this church it's a twin process for them. What are we going to say about LGBT questions, and are we going to leave our denomination? And the conversations are happening together. They've been very open with their regional supervisor. They've been very open with their congregation that these are all questions they're having, and it's been just really they've done a spectacular job of it. And since they've taken 18 months on their process and they have not made an official statement. They have not been kind of brought into court or dismissed. but they know that that time is coming soon. But they're going to transition to a third way position, which is saying, hey, we recognize people who hold a non-affirming position, and those people who hold affirming position are all trying to follow Jesus and follow scriptures. And we recognize that this is not going to be a litmus test for us in terms of faithful obedience, where you stand on LGBT inclusion or gay marriage. And thus, we're going to welcome all into leadership, whether you're conservative or progressive on this question. And their denomination will exclude them when they do that. So,
Um, and just a follow-up point for those who are in that position of having denominational limitations, we have found that the churches who get to that point where they sort out how can we be maximally affirming within our restrictions, they're still building um, like a very welcoming congregation community that is very healthy for the LGBTQ people that are currently there. They might not be like drawing in the crowds of the LGBT community, um, looking for a church space to call home, but for those who are already there, they're making a huge difference. So there is value in sorting out what that looks like for your church. And that's something that we, Small Church Big Table, have helped churches talk through in our cohorts that we do.
mhm.
Um, let me see. If you guys have any questions, pop them in the chat. We'll unmute here in just a minute. There's one more question I wanted to get to. Oh, what are some of the biggest mistakes that churches make when they're going through the discernment process?
I know one church where the head pastor literally didn't tell the elders or the staff and just stood up on one Sunday and say, by the way, we're now affirming. I just didn't go so well. Um,
Oh, wow.
And expand the circle a little bit. Like I was at a church that the elders and the pastor had a process, but because of some of the elders who didn't agree with the conclusion, it basically was sprung on the congregation with no congregational process. That also didn't go so well.
at
Those would have
Denver,
been on Sundays, though.
very exciting Sunday, that next Sunday. Yeah, they sent those elders sent a letter to the entire congregation, right, Daniel?
Right.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Denver Community Church has spoken openly about this. Michael Hidalgo, the head pastor, he's written that his biggest regret is that they went through a process. They became third way, as we discussed earlier. He said his biggest regret is that he did not tell the congregation at the beginning of the process.
Hmm.
They went through an elder process and then told the congregation. He wished that they had brought the congregation in first. So,
As just like, hey, we're thinking about this, we're asking questions, we're going to do some studying, or to
yeah,
invite them into the process.
I think the former. Although there are some churches that do the latter and do it really well. Um, so
Yeah.
Bill, is that something that you've seen? Like, would you second that advice given what you've seen with various churches that have gone through the process? Or
yeah, great question, Daniel. It really depends on your church. If you're like our church was a very conservative evangelical church, and my son came out, and so we said, "Hey, we're going to have this conversation." People were very uncomfortable having a pastor with a gay son. And when we went through an 18-month study process. It was fantastic. Three true conservatives, three true progressives, a lot of folks in the middle, wrestling all leaders in the congregation. We came to a unanimous conclusion. We're going to be third way. We're going to have conservatives and progressives together, following Jesus. LGBT people will have all levels of leadership. And if it's, if it violates your conscience, you won't attend a wedding or conduct a wedding, these sorts of things, right? Third way. We didn't lose a single person when we made our announcement, but when we announced we were going to talk about it at the beginning of the process, of the 18-month process, we lost half the church.
hmm,
So, I mean, because people said you should not talk about it.
hmm,
So it depends a little bit. By and large, a lot of churches today that we're working with, that are moderately evangelical because there are gay kids in their youth group now, because it's just, 10 years ago, there weren't as many people who were out. Typically, it's more known that this is a conversation and we should have it. So I
Yeah.
think in general, but there are some churches where I'd say, you know what, let's talk offline for a while first.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really hard to say, this is the best practice that's universally, beneficial for all churches. There was a lot of nuance in it. Okay, one more question, and then we'll do the unmuting. For churches that have a third way approach, how do they typically handle LGBTQ people in regards to membership or leadership?
I'll just say, so we just did a webinar on what it means to be third way, and I've sort of, and I'd love Daniel and Mara for you guys to disagree with me. Um, but we came to the conclusion that there's sort of third way affirming and third way non-affirming, where both of these folks say, you're Christians. We love you. Like we can do leadership together. The key difference is one will conduct a gay wedding, one won't. On the outside of each of them, we see folks who say the people over there are not Christians. The people over there are not Christians, right? They're homophobes. They don't believe in the Bible, and there's more finger pointing. So in the middle, typically we see a lot of the ones who do it well, and there are fewer non-affirming churches that do it well, honestly, third way non-affirming, that you see LGBT leadership at all levels. Preaching, it's just talked about. Folks will go to a gay pride, will host an event at a gay pride. There are conservative third way churches that will do that. But on the more affirming third way side, the key is to make sure that the conservatives still feel welcome, right? Like, yeah, of course you can be here. Of course you can be an elder. And we have all kinds of leaders at our church, not all kinds, not as much anymore, but we have leaders in our church who still are not comfortable with same-sex weddings. And we
So you're
let
saying
them.
like have criteria for membership or specific leadership roles, but sexuality is not a factor.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I would just add to that again that clear is kind. I just read a statement of a church in West Michigan um, who said essentially, we acknowledge that there are different viewpoints on this, and we want everyone to be able to participate in the life of the church. And they actually said in their statement on their website, while we do not practice same-sex marriage, um, all people are welcome into the following roles and like listed out exactly what LGBT people are welcome to do. So membership, sacraments, they mentioned serving. There were some other things. So that feels like really gracious to me because it's the nuance that people don't know that can be really hurtful.
Yeah.
Super helpful.
And that's like the whole mission of Small Church Big Table is we just want to help churches find the clarity, like whatever it looks like and have that available to people to know what your position is on various, views. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording. But first, thank everybody for being here.